is your life going right now in COVID? And how is your morning right now?
Yeah, so I am just about 40 minutes west of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The sun is shining today. It has finally warmed up. So all of my vegetables went out in the backyard and we're just waiting on some strawberries and carrots.
That's really nice. You must be enjoying right now. So tell me a little bit about your journey. Like, when were you diagnosed and how did you find out?
Okay, so maybe I'll give you a little bit of background on me first. So I work within the financial industry, investments in particular. I have been working in this industry, so it's been nearly 20 years now. I am a mom of two, and at the time I was diagnosed, my kids were 5. So life was very busy at the time, being, full-time career mom with little ones running around. And, I knew that there was something wrong, but I was unwilling to pause. I was unwilling to acknowledge that there was something wrong. So I kind of just kept going. I was still working out at the gym up until 3 weeks before my diagnosis. And I ended up locking a muscle in my hip, and it stayed locked for about 4 days before I went to the hospital. It was excruciating. And I saw the doctor there. The doctor gave me some medications. The medications were great, but they didn't make me very functional. I wasn't really I wasn't able to drive. I wasn't able to parent. I mean, I felt great and warm and fuzzy on the inside, but I was totally non-functional. So I ended up making an appointment with my doctor a few days later, and she changed the medications that the hospital had given me. And one of the medications that she prescribed is called meloxicam, which is an ibuprofen-based painkiller. So I took the first diagnosis, or I took the first dose of those medications the next day. I got up, I went to work. I came home at the end of the day, and when I got out of the shower, I noticed that I had a couple of funny looking bruises on my legs, and I couldn't recall how they got there. So I watched it for a little bit. The next morning, I noticed another funny bruise. So I called my doctor back and I said, hey, I've taken the medications and I have these funny bruises, and it started when I took the medication. I'm not sure what's going on. What do you think? And she said, it's probably not the medication. Let us know if it gets worse or doesn't improve, and call the pharmacy if you have any other questions. So I just figured, not a big deal. And within the next 48 to 72 hours, my body was covered in bruises. My blood vessels had started bursting, and I was hemorrhaging. So I took myself to the local ER. The day that I went into the ER was December 8th of 2017. And I went in and I explained to the triage nurse there what was happening. She told me to stop taking the medication and completely invalidated my concerns. I had to argue with her to get her to allow me to see a doctor that morning. They eventually let me see the doctor, and they took some blood. And within 5 hours, I was admitted to a cancer center to start treatment for acute promyelocytic leukemia.
That must be so scary for you.
It was fast. It happened very fast.
Exactly. But now look at you. You look so great. I've seen your pictures before. I mean, you're now looking so beautiful and wonderful. And I hope you're doing great in your life.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're great. it was a really hard thing to go through. But if I'm being really honest with you, I think that, you know, my best friend used to say to me all the time before I got sick, she used to say, Michelle, you need to slow down. You're going to get sick if you don't stop doing what you're doing. And because I was always go, 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 go. And I never really allowed myself to rest. I was always high stress, high anxiety. I always took on too much responsibility. And that wears on you. There's only so long that you can sustain that kind of lifestyle. And she was right. I did get very sick. And so I spent 22 days in the hospital. When I spoke to my oncologist, after we did the first biopsy, he came in and he said, your blood composition is 90% leukemia cells. You're going to have to be here for the next month. And and he said, the good news is that you have a 90% chance of a full recovery, but you have to make it through the first 10 days of treatment. And I said, what exactly do you mean? I have to get through the first 10 days. And he actually wouldn't elaborate. The treatment was really, it was intense. The treatment was intense. And as quickly as the leukemia came on, the treatment also had to work as quickly. So it was very intense. It was very painful. The symptoms were pretty challenging to deal with. But you know, the thing about it is, as terrible as it was to go through, it really forced me to change my perspective on life. It gave me the pause. It scared me enough that I kind of went, okay, I need to sit back and I really need to reevaluate what is important to me, because managing life the way that I had been wasn't doing me any good. So it really gave me the opportunity to sit back and say, hey, like, you know, are the material things that I've been working so hard towards obtaining really worth my peace of mind? And the answer is no, unequivocally no. And so it was a huge wake-up call for me. I needed it. And while I wouldn't want to go through it again and I wouldn't wish it on anyone else, it was the catalyst that I needed to get to the place that I am at today.
Yes, definitely we work for money, but we also work for some peace and satisfaction in life. And like you said, like your kids were just fine and you were like hospital all the month, like, you know, your initial days and all the time. So of course your kids are very small. So do they know about your diagnosis, or like how did you tell them when you were so far away from them?
Yeah. So, so we're blended. Our family is blended. So I have a biological daughter who is 3 weeks older than my husband's biological daughter.
Okay.
So it kind of complicated our situation a little bit, because it wasn't like, you know, the kids come to the hospital together and we sit and have a conversation as a family about what's going on. That's not really the way it was, because we had to manage co-parents on both sides also. And so like I mentioned to you earlier, when I was diagnosed, I mean, I got up that morning, I dropped my daughter off at school, I took myself to the hospital, and next thing I know, I'm sitting in a bed at a cancer center, and I literally couldn't even pick my daughter up from school at the end of the day. So that was like, as a mom, I felt like I was abandoning her. And that was really difficult for me to deal with. Her dad was great though. He was able to get her that day. She was able to stay with him for the month that I was in the hospital. And so he was actually the one who explained that mommy wasn't well, mommy was in the hospital, mommy was going to be in the hospital for a little while, but that she could come see me. And so when the kids did come to the hospital, I actually was hooked up to 3 different IVs. So I had 2 IV poles on either side of the bed, and wires and stuff all over the place. And we were just really open with them. You know, we just asked them if they had any questions. You know, we answered the questions in the most age appropriate language that we could at the time. And we, you know, encouraged them and let them know there was nothing to be afraid of. And the way that we explained it to them was, you know, they had just gotten their flu shots for the winter season, and we had to have, I mean, they're terrified of needles, you know, as most kids are. And we had to explain to them the importance of getting a flu shot, right? Like that you get a flu shot because you need to keep the bad bugs out of your body. The needle helps keep the bad bugs out. And so the way that we explained the leukemia to the kids was that the bad bugs had gotten into mommy's blood. And now we needed the doctors to help get the bad bugs out of my blood. So it was very simple language for them. They understood that I was sick. We didn't explain to them, you know, we didn't explain to them how high the risk was at that time. Like, we didn't need them to be worrying about what happens if I didn't make it through the first 10 days, right? We didn't focus on that with them at all. We just explained mommy was sick and the doctors needed to help make me better. So they actually did a really good job of handling it. They asked lots of questions. They were very curious about it. And while I think that there was an element of fear for them at that time, I think the way that we handled it really helped them manage it. It got harder as things went on though, because the treatment plan that I was on was actually 2.5 years. So, I mean, yay, I made it through the first 10 days, and yay, I got to go home, and nobody was really sure if that was ever going to happen, right? So there were wins and there were things to celebrate. But as the treatment progressed, and, you know, mommy wasn't the fun mom, you know, playing at the park with them anymore, or running after them and playing tag with them anymore. They started to experience the longer term effect of me being ill and in treatment. The more they started to react, they started to have symptoms of sadness, depression, confusion, frustration. And one of them actually ended up acting out and hitting the other one day, which it's never happened before. It's never happened since, but it was just because she was so sad and she was so frustrated and she had so many big emotions inside. And I don't think that she knew what to do with them. So she ended up acting out and hitting her sister. So it was a journey with the kids. For us, we really had to put ourselves in a place of being very honest with ourselves about our emotions. And we really had to be vulnerable with each other and with the kids so that we could help them work through those emotions too. So
of course, that might be so scary for you all the time, explaining kids like, what should I explain next? Like, how do I manage this all? And when she came and saw you on the bed, of course, it might be difficult and she must be questioning a lot to you.
Yeah.
So like, how did mental health affect you during this treatment and your family when you're going through the treatments?
Oh gosh. What's really interesting is that, so for me personally, it affected us all differently. But for me personally, so in that conversation, that first conversation that I had with the oncologist, what he explained to me was that at the time that I was admitted at the cancer center, I only had about 24 hours left.
My God.
So if I had not gone to the hospital when I did, and if I had not begun treatment when I did, there is a very, very high likelihood that I would have died the next day. And when somebody tells you something like that, it rocks your world in a way that nothing else will. I think that's something that we as humans are really good at is denying our own mortality, right? Nobody wants to think about death. Nobody wants to think about illness. Nobody wants to think that one day you're not going to be here, right? And so we do a really good job of stomping that down and never acknowledging it. And so when you hear something like that, your world shifts. Everything about your belief of the world shifts. And I kind of went into like this survival mode where, to be honest with you, I didn't really feel very much. It was just like, here's this thing that I'm up against. My chances aren't very good right now. And I just need to beat this thing. And so my mindset was very much in the fight rather than the feeling. And that lasted for me for about 5 months. And, it's really funny because I spent that month in the hospital, and then I spent another 4 months in active IV treatment. My treatment plan was IV chemo almost every day for those 4 months. And so I was just always like, I was always on, right? I was always at the hospital, driving to the hospital, driving back from the hospital, momming with whatever energy I had when I was home. I just always had to be on. So I didn't really have the opportunity to feel much. And it was the last 2 weeks of the IV treatment when I had hit remission at that point, and everybody was pretty confident that I was going to pull through this thing. And that's when I kind of felt like I got hit by a truck. All of the emotions that I did not feel in that first 5 months just hit me like that. And I can remember sitting in the outpatient services at the hospital, getting my chemo and just breaking down and bawling. And it was in and around that time that I realized what I was experiencing was post-traumatic stress disorder. And that lasted a while. I ended up in therapy. Once my IV treatment was done, I ended up in psychotherapy. I was going like once a week to help me work through those emotions. And I got to be honest with you, it was super challenging to get through. It was very complex. And I mean, we're here now when it's, 3 years later, and the mental health impact is still not over. It's almost like every once in a while, every once in a while, this thing comes up and I deal with this emotion, or I deal with this, these thoughts that get stuck in my head, and I deal with those things and resolve those things. And then the next thing pops out from the deep, dark corners of my mind, and I have to deal with those things too. So it's been challenging. It's been a long road for sure. From a mental health perspective, there have been a lot of positive things that's come out of it, because as I've dealt with those things, I've also been able to resolve what it was that drove me to work so hard before I got sick. And so I'm, from a mental health perspective, I'm actually much healthier than I was. So again,
It is like, yes, you're like a woman and also a mama, and you have to keep your health very stable.
yeah, for sure. But you know, the thing is that you can't. In a situation like that, you can't stay stable. You can try,
Yes,
but it's not possible. I mean, when you go through something like chemotherapy, or at least in my situation, there were days where I had no energy. There was days where you know, I wasn't able to make myself a meal, right? So, and the thing that we don't necessarily realize until we're in a situation like that is that it takes mental energy to self-regulate, right? It takes mental energy to be on all the time. And when that energy doesn't exist, self-regulation goes out the window, right? And the things that you feel, the things that you're experiencing, they come out whether you want them to or not. So one of the things that I had to learn while I was going through all that, which was maybe one of the hardest lessons for me, was to be humble. Because when I had my moments where I felt really bad, you know, and my kids needed something from me, or, you know, I'm super tired and the kids are loud and they're jumping around and they're doing what kids do, and I don't have the ability to self-regulate and I yell at them, I need to be able to go back after the fact and say, hey guys, I just want you to know that I was having a really tough moment and I'm so sorry that I yelled at you and you didn't deserve that.
it's so understandable as your mom, and also like when you're going, it might be feeling so tiring, so suffering all the day, going for chemotherapy and then coming back, driving home back, and then smiling and looking at your kids all the time.
Yeah, it was hard, but you know what it taught us was, it taught us how to communicate better. It taught us how to support each other better too, right? So I mean, yeah, it was hard. It was hard for everybody. My husband is not, I mean, my husband is very emotional, but you don't see it very often. My husband doesn't express his emotions very much. And going through that experience for him, forced him to deal with, it forced him to have to deal with, acknowledging his emotions and expressing outwardly his emotions. You know, like, he is a very stoic person, so you know, he carries himself with pride, and he's not a guy that you see cry, and he's not a guy that you see angry and all that. But he felt those things and he wasn't able to control those things either. So he did cry, and he did have moments of anger and frustration that we saw and we weren't used to seeing from him. And you know, and so we had to learn to be very compassionate and empathetic with him.
Yes, communication is always a key.
Yes, absolutely. So it was a lot. There were a lot of things that were happening for us in terms of mental health. And you know, sometimes we did really great and sometimes we didn't do very good, and we just had to say sorry.
But you guys fought together, right? And now look at you.
Yeah.
So, like, talking about your treatments, what treatments did you undergo?
So because I was diagnosed in the high risk category of acute promyelocytic leukemia, my treatment plan ended up being, so I had to take 4 doses of what's called idarubicin, which is a pretty heavy hitting chemotherapy that happened in the first 7 days after being diagnosed. And then as on top of that chemotherapy, I also took 3 rounds of about 30 doses of arsenic trioxide.
That's big.
Yeah, it was terrifying. You know, it's funny because, you know, arsenic is everybody is most familiar with arsenic as rat poison, right? Like it's what we put in rat poison. So,
Yeah.
you know, when the oncologist explains, you know, that your treatment is going to essentially be rat poison, it was terrifying. And I guess I never really thought about it. I mean, chemotherapy is poison, right? Like essentially that's what it all is. But, you know, I had friends who were also undergoing treatment that I had met along the way, who were taking a chemotherapy called vincristine, right? So if you're sitting down with your oncologist and your oncologist is like, here's your treatment plan, you know, the chemotherapy that you're going to be taking is vincristine, you know, you might think about somebody you know named Christine, or you might think about the actor Vin Diesel or something. You wouldn't think to yourself, oh my God, like they're giving me poison, you know what I mean? But when they came to me and they were like, yeah, arsenic trioxide, it was shocking. So that was the treatment that I took within the first, second, and third round of treatment. And then the fourth round of treatment, which was called maintenance therapy. The treatment plan was 6-MP. It was methotrexate, and it was all trans retinoic acid. I ended up having to stop the 6-MP after the first day because I had an allergic reaction to it. But the other 2 medications I continued to take for nearly 2 years.
That might be so scary and painful all the time, taking injections and all this chemotherapy process.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say lucky, but I'll say that for the maintenance round, the medications that I took were all oral. So I didn't have to do injections anymore. My central line was removed from my arm. So I got freedom with my arms again, which was nice. But you're right. 2.5 years is a long time to put your body through those kinds of heavy medications. And it was very hard. I ended up, so halfway through the maintenance round, which was supposed to be 2 full years, I went to my on-call. I did a bunch of research. I had a very good understanding of my medications, their purposes, what the various risks were with those medications, as well as what the risk was of stopping treatment early. And about a year into maintenance, halfway through, I went to my oncologist and I said, I can't do it anymore. Like I said before, as a mom, you just can't turn it off, right? Like you need to be available, and especially at such a young age. And what I found with those medications was that they did cause quite a significant amount of pain in my body. There were nights, you know, that at the end of the day, I would, you know, go upstairs to my bedroom and I would be pulling myself up on the railing because the pain in my knees and my ankles was so severe. So I don't think any oncologist likes to hear their patient say, I'm going to stop treatment early. But we came to a really good compromise, and I did stop the methotrexate early, but I did continue on the all-trans retinoic acid for the full course of the treatment. And we were both satisfied with that compromise, and I kind of just put my head down and barreled through the rest.
Yes, definitely. And look at you, you're strong. You did it even after stopping some of the things out of the treatment. We can
Yeah,
say that.
you
Yeah.
know, I
So, how leukemia changed the outlook of your life?
completely. It changed the outlook of my life completely. Um, like I said, I was a pretty stressed out person. I was a very high anxiety person before. Something that I didn't recognize until I went through that kind of emotional crash 4 or 5 months in was that um, I don't know how we do this, but at some point in our lives, some of us have this really bad habit of tying our self-worth and our value to our employment, to our jobs and our careers. And I realized that is something that I had done. And so not being at work, um, for it kind of threw me into a bit of a tailspin because I was like, who am I without my job? Um, and that was difficult to deal with. It was difficult to work through that. But ultimately, what I came to realize is that my job, my career, no matter how much I like it or how much I don't, is something that I do. It is not who I am. And so I was really able to walk that back and disassociate my self-worth to my job. And I was able to start focusing on the things that truly help me feel valued and things that make me feel loved and cared for. And more importantly, what makes me feel fulfilled in my life. And a lot of that comes from inside, right? A lot of that comes from how it is that we care for ourselves. And
Yes, but definitely, like your commitments with the work actually prove how like modern society works today with a modern woman. And
yes,
definitely, you're being like committed to your work. It's like good for you only. But of course, health is also important.
well,
So
yeah, for sure, we need rest, right? I mean, we focus, we grow up, and you know, there is always this academic push, right? To education is the be all and end all of life. If you don't get a good
exactly.
education, then you're not going to get a good job, and if you don't have a good job, then you're not going to make, you know, money to have the things that you want or to be secure or whatever. And I think that mentality instills an unhealthy level of fear in people, right? And we don't spend enough time focusing on um, adequate sleep. We don't spend enough time on a healthy diet. We don't spend enough time encouraging not so much kids. I think it's acceptable for kids, but older kids and adults, we don't spend so much time encouraging people to get out and be active and move their bodies, or just to understand the practice of gratitude, the practice of mindfulness, the practice of joy, because that's what these things are. They are a practice, but nobody really tells you that. Right?
Exactly. Like people are just working everywhere. Like they're just rushing behind the competition on the market. Like when I will get into the top, when I'll do this thing. But no one cares about the health most like this. But
That's,
definitely, maybe the COVID situation has changed now, hopefully.
I
People
think
must
it's
care a
changed.
lot.
I think it
Yeah,
has changed for some people, for sure. I definitely think, and you know, I think the other thing, I think there's a couple of really important things that it has raised here in Canada, and probably in many places from the perspective of what we really have to be grateful for, right? I mean,
definitely.
so I think that there's definitely that shift, and I think that needed to happen, and that's really healthy. I think the other thing that it has done in a number of places, Canada included, is shown us where there are gaps in our healthcare systems too, right?
Yes.
And I think, and I mean, there are probably hundreds of thousands of people who are currently not being screened for cancers and who are going to face the repercussions of that in the long run, because the Canadian healthcare system, as well as other healthcare systems, are not really set up to deal with what it is that we've been going through. And so my other hope is that understanding that that's the case, understanding that there are gaps in our healthcare systems, my hope is that our governments spend the time, effort, and money to rectify those situations so we don't find ourselves in a situation like this again.
Definitely. If we see like cancer patients, like I have been researching on it. I can totally see like how people go through, and like of course, like after researching it, I have seen it.
Yeah. So we have, even for me, there are screenings that I should probably be doing right now. But the way that our vaccination plan has rolled out in Ontario, I actually didn't qualify for a vaccine until last week. So I'm actually not even vaccinated yet.
Not yet.
No.
Okay.
So the rules that they put in place for our vaccine rollout, the rules didn't include me. So I get captured in the bucket that goes by age, right? So they said people who had diagnosed autoimmune diseases, people who had been diagnosed with cancer within 1 year, or people who had experienced a stem cell transplant within 1 year, they were able to get vaccinated months ago. But because my diagnosis was 3 years ago, regardless of how long my treatment plan was, regardless of the effectiveness of my immune system, I just didn't qualify. So I am not inclined to be going out into the public right now. I'm not inclined to go to screening centers or hospitals or even to my family doctor's office. So there are a lot of people who are in situations like that, and it's terrifying, actually.
Yes.
Great talking to you. Thanks very much for the opportunity.